This is Dateline News and Conversation. My guest tonight is a good friend. He's been on the show many times, Dimitri Lascaris. He'll be coming to us tonight from Montreal, Canada. It's snowing and cold. Dimitri, he did a monologue on his Reason to Resist Substack channel this past week. It was entitled Debunking Trump's 28-Point Peace Prank. And when I read that, I asked Dimitri if we could do a show about that. In the meantime, the United States, Trump, came out with their new national security strategy. I've read the whole thing, and coupled with the peace plan, I think it's all smoke and mirrors. I want to start with this tonight. It's a quote from a friend of mine. I don't know if it'll set the tone for this or what, but the greatest power of the capitalist West, the United States, is not its military power, its industrial capacity, its innovation, its market dynamism, or its technological prowess. Its greatest power is the capacity to mystify reality, to deceive and cover up the truth, to distract, confuse, and propagandize people, to get people to work against their own interest, their own humanity, and against reason and logic. It seeks domination through total deception. And I think that's what my focus on tonight's discussion will be. The United States is a nation of hucksters. Dimitri, welcome back to the show.
Thank you so much, Regis. Great to be here.
Well, I don't know if that introduction is going to really help with our discussion tonight, but I think it does. Because I think what Trump is a huckster. I think you've called him a shyster. But let's first begin with the 28-point peace prank, as you call it, and I couldn't agree with you more. Mm-hmm. Tell me a little bit about why you did that monologue, and then let's get into the guts of it.
So on November 18th, I believe it was, I saw reports on the alternative media. I almost never pay attention to the corporate media. When I do, it's just to figure out what lies they want us to believe. That there had been a scoop, and the scoop had been published by Axios, which has become, as far as I can tell, the go-to platform for the political elite in the United States when they want to plant a fake story in the media. They go to Axios with unnamed sources who advise it of some scoop. And so the scoop was that Steve Witkoff, whom I've also described as a shyster, had been negotiating with, I believe it's Kirill Dmitriev, an advisor to President Putin, a 28-point peace plan. So at the time, I could have gone about trying to inform myself about what was in this plan, Regis, but I just didn't even bother. Immediately, I rolled my eyes and thought, this is another episode in the ongoing peace kabuki theater, which actually started not under Donald Trump. It started under Joe Biden, and it wasn't in relation to Russia. It was in relation to the genocidal war on Gaza. There was this just cycle of endless reports that they were on the verge of some kind of peace agreement with Hamas. And Tony Blinken was flying all over the Middle East, going from one capital to another. And they always broke down these supposed negotiations, and they always pointed the finger at the Palestinians for the failure of the negotiations. So, of course, Biden wasn't really interested. He didn't even pretend to be interested in peace with the Russian Federation. But Trump comes along. He does the reverse. He doesn't show any real interest in ending the slaughter of Palestinians, but he tells everybody, I want to do peace with the Russians. And then we start going through this cycle again and again and again of Steve Witkoff going off to Moscow, meeting with Kirill Dmitriev and so forth. So I was absolutely convinced by the time we get to November 18th that this was all just a spectacle. So I didn't even bother looking at the thing. But I'm doing my daily thing of trying to keep myself informed about what's going on by watching the alternative media. And again and again and again, between November 18th and the time that I did that monologue, people whom I respect, and I'll name some of them, people like Glenn Greenwald, people like Daniel Davis, people like Alex Mercouris at the Duran and Alex Christoforou. They were analyzing what was going on, with the 28-point peace prank, as I called it. And they kept expressing the view that Trump really, really wants peace. And despite all evidence to the contrary. And so finally, I couldn't take it anymore. And I also was quite annoyed at the fact that this plan was sucking up so much oxygen in the alternative media, which was causing them to ignore other issues that I thought it was important for us all to be focused upon. And that's what prompted me to finally sit down and read the damn plan and do this monologue. And when I read it, which took a few minutes, it's like you could write that thing on a napkin, which is one of the reasons why it's so ridiculous. The idea that you're gonna end this war, which has been going on for nearly 4 years, and which is the result of decades of Western interventionism and aggression and lies with respect to the Russian Federation and Ukraine. The idea that you're going to end the thing based upon some nonsense you scribbled on a napkin is itself laughable. This would require intensive negotiation that would go on for months with teams of experts, as the Russian government has repeatedly pointed out. And you'd have to work through some very technically complicated issues and some very emotional issues. You'd have to have a good grasp of the history of the conflict and so forth. And it would take months, assuming you had even the outline of an agreement and both sides were genuinely committed to peace, which is not the case. So the whole thing was laughable. And I read it, and it took me a few minutes to read this joke of a plan. And it was immediately apparent that there were several deal breakers in this thing. Not one deal breaker, but several. And not only was it immediately apparent that this thing would be unacceptable to the Russian Federation in its original form, but we soon found out that this was not a firm offer that the United States government was making to Russia. What it was the beginning of a discussion between the United States and its vassal Ukraine. Which inevitably, as we've seen over and over again, was going to object to anything in the plan that amounted to a concession to the Russian Federation. So then they hold this meeting in Florida, which I think was like November 29th or something, where, the Americans, Witkoff, and now we have Jared Kushner, another shyster, sitting beside Witkoff for some reason. He has absolutely no qualification whatsoever to be handling negotiations with the Russian Federation, but Kushner's there. And across the table are these corrupt senior officials from the Ukrainian regime. And they're having a negotiation as if both of them are independent actors, which is laughable. The Ukrainian government is a total vassal of Washington and will do whatever Washington tells it to do. And emerging from this meeting is an even worse version of the 28-point peace prank. So now it's like an absolute guarantee that this is not going to go anywhere, which is precisely what I predicted. So I sat down, I spent a good bit of time on my program going through the history of Donald Trump's just incessant warmongering and lies, and explaining to people, and this is my basic thesis, and I don't know why people in the alternative media have so much trouble understanding this, that the man told people he wanted peace and he wanted to end the Ukraine war to win their votes. That's what he did. He did what politicians have been doing since politics were invented. He was lying to get people to vote for him. And then as soon as he entered the White House, he showed his true colors. He hasn't stopped sending weapons to Ukraine. He hasn't stopped providing military intelligence to Ukraine. He actually worsened the sanctions that were being imposed upon Russia by going after India and China for buying Russian oil. His rhetoric at the end of the day isn't matched by his actions in any meaningful respect. And so we now should be convinced, all of us who are thinking rationally, that this man lied from the get-go.
Dimitri, you brought out something in your monologue that I think was really important. Trump has been lying about this being Biden's war. But he did admit that during Trump 1.0, he sent Javelins and HIMARS and Howitzers to Ukraine. During his first administration, he is the one who actually, one could argue, began to accelerate the war in Ukraine, which then Biden inherited. Is that what you meant in your monologue?
Well, I would just modify one bit what you said. My understanding, what we do know for sure, is because Trump himself has admitted it, he's even bragged about it, was that he was the first president to send lethal weaponry to Ukraine. People had pressured Barack Obama to do that. Obama was willing to orchestrate a coup in Ukraine, which happened in 2014. It was the most, as the head of Stratfor, I believe his name was George Friedman at the time, said it was the most blatant coup in human history. This is coming from the head of an agency that is closely tied to the Pentagon, a consulting firm, Stratfor. Okay, that happened under Obama, but Obama was pressured to send lethal weaponry to Ukraine, and he said no. And there's this, even Antony Blinken at the time, tried to justify Obama's refusal by saying, as Obama himself had said, that Russia had escalation dominance in Ukraine, and if you tried to engage them in a war, a physical war, not a propaganda war or an economic war, but a physical war, that Ukraine was going to get destroyed. That was effectively what the Obama administration recognized. So they said no lethal weaponry. And Trump comes along and he goes, to hell with that. Let's send them javelins. We're going to send them all kinds of javelins. My understanding is that the HIMARS weren't actually delivered until Biden comes into office. But what happened was there was training of Ukrainian troops in the use of HIMARS during the first Trump administration. There were military exercises, that very, very provocative military exercises that happened with the American and Ukrainian troops and other NATO troops during the first Trump administration. Trump withdrew the United States from the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty during the first Trump administration, which was an extremely provocative and dangerous move, and one that I think sent a distinct message to Russia that there was trouble on the horizon with the United States. Trump refused to take off the table the demand that Ukraine become a formal member of NATO. And by the time you get to the end of the first Trump administration, Regis, what effectively had happened was that Ukraine had become a de facto member of NATO. It was a member of NATO in all but name. And that's what prompted the Russian Federation during the Biden administration to issue what was, in effect, an ultimatum to the United States. And you may recall that back, I think in December 2021, a few months before the special military operation began, the Russians put to the Americans a draft treaty on a new security architecture, which would have not only prevented Ukraine from becoming a member of NATO, which is an existential threat to Russia, but would have effectively rolled back the borders of NATO to a degree consistent with the promise that had been made to the Soviet Union and then the Russian Federation back in the 90s, that NATO would not expand 1 inch eastward. And Biden said, no, not doing that. So what happened is that the war, the stage for the war was set under the first Trump administration. Biden escalated it further. The threat to Russia, was given an ultimatum, said flatly no, not interested, won't even discuss your treaty with you, to President Putin. And then and only then did the Russians send in the regular army. So that's how we got here. And Trump played an absolutely critical role in starting this war. This idea that this is Joe Biden's war is one of these pieces of propaganda that the Western corporate media have too readily repeated. And it's time for us to flush it down the toilet.
Yeah, another lie in a whole series of lies. But I think it's very important. Historical context is really important for understanding what's going on and for determining truth. And Trump has been lying. I mean, I think you called him a sociopathic,
genocidal war criminal.
Yeah, besides being a war criminal. We'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. Let's get back to the 28-point peace prank. You said there are a number of things in that prank that Russia could never agree to. Take us through what those objections would be. I mean, non-starters, totally ridiculous.
Yeah, and this is I stress this was the original version, which got watered down. It's unclear to what degree it was watered down, but it got even worse from a Russian perspective after this meeting in Florida, which was itself kabuki theater between Ukrainian officials and Witkoff and Kushner, right? So, but the original version said, for example, that the line of contact in the Kherson region and Zaporozhye would be frozen where it currently is, okay? Which would mean that you'd be leaving out large chunks of those oblasts from Russian sovereign territory. Most importantly, Kherson City, which Russia had actually controlled for some period of time after the special military operation began, but they were forced to withdraw on the other side of the Dnieper River because of logistical issues. And also the city of Zaporozhye would be excluded. But these have been incorporated into the Russian Federation. And it's my understanding, I'm not a lawyer in Russia, but this has actually been incorporated into the Russian constitution itself. There's just no reason to believe at all that the Russians are willing to give up Kherson City and Zaporozhye and the rest of those oblasts that they don't currently control. And then with respect to Donetsk, the plan did say that the Ukrainians would withdraw from the parts of that oblast that they don't currently control. But it also said that Russian forces would not move in to the area that the Ukrainians had vacated, which is going to be, that in and of itself will be unacceptable, because I think that the Russians will say we have to send our troops in there to protect that territory from any further aggression by the Ukrainians. And also with respect to all of these territories, the plan used this contradictory language. On the one hand, it talked about de facto Russian control over these areas. And then on the other hand, it said that the international community would recognize Russia's control over the Donetsk Oblast, but not the parts of Kherson and Zaporizhzhia that Russia controls. So the Russians have been absolutely adamant that it's not enough for the contact line to be frozen along the borders of the oblast or the current front line, but there actually has to be formal recognition of Russia's sovereignty over these areas, all of them, so that there will be no further pretext for war on these areas and on the population of these areas who voted to be part of the Russian Federation. So that was the first thing, just right there, deal breaker. Russians ain't going to accept that. No, not happening. Number two, the 28-point peace prank envisioned that the $300 billion of Russian central bank assets that have been effectively stolen by Western governments, they haven't formally confiscated it, but they've frozen them, and they've been, apparently they've been paying the interest on this huge amount of money to the Ukrainians. The plan said that $100 billion of that money was going to be used to reconstruct the part of Ukraine that would remain in Ukrainian control, so which would be the majority of Ukrainian territory. There's no way Russia's going to agree to that. That is, from the Russian perspective, theft of their money. And as I've pointed out many times, whatever you may think about, the idea that Russia should contribute to the reconstruction of Ukraine, you can make that case, but the bottom line is Russia ain't going to agree to that money or any part of it, the central bank money being confiscated. They're going to demand that it be returned to them. And then a third point that was just a joke, it was a joke really, is that there was going to be this peace council set up, just as they've done in the case of the Gaza Strip, where they created this peace board, and that Donald Trump was going to be put in charge of this thing to oversee the peace, which is part of this lie, that the United States is capable of acting as a mediator between the Ukrainians and the Russians. That's the United States is not only a party to this war, and not only did Trump effectively start this war by sending lethal weaponry to Ukraine, but they are actually the driving force behind the war. The United States is more responsible for this war than anybody. And the idea that the president of the United States, and least of all Donald Trump, this psychopath, would be put in charge of determining whether one side or the other is violating the agreement would be, the Russians would laugh out loud at that notion and would never accept it. And those are just, three of the big points, in my opinion, Regis, that each of which in and of itself constitutes a deal breaker. So this thing was dead on arrival. And, I was absolutely correct in assuming back on November 18th, when the news about this so-called scoop broke, that this was going to go nowhere.
Let's talk about how President Putin and the Russian side did this. They said, "Oh well, it's a starting point. There's a framework there." And in my mind, Dimitri, this was just once again Russia smiling diplomatically, saying, "We want to continue. We want to talk about peace, but you know what? When they leave the room, they're smiling and laughing and probably having shots of vodka because they know this is not going anywhere." Would you agree that just Putin and Lavrov are just being so diplomatic and, I would say, stringing Donald Trump on?
I think they're definitely being diplomatic. Definitely they are being diplomatic. The interesting question is why. I don't know that I would describe it as stringing Trump along. That's certainly a plausible interpretation, because the whole time that this kabuki theater is going on, Russian forces continue to do what they're doing, and they're, acquiring more and more territory and, whittling down the devastated Ukrainian military more and more every minute of the day. So the longer these talks are going on and Russia keeps doing what it's doing on the battlefield, the closer Russia gets to victory. So you could characterize that, I suppose, as stringing the U.S. government along. But I think there's some really important things going on here, other than, buying time for the Russian military to finish the job. Number one, we're talking here about nuclear armed states. The United States and Russian Federation have the largest nuclear arsenals in the world by far. And it is a bad idea to, especially when you're in a war against each other, which effectively they are, not to talk. That is extremely dangerous. The war is dangerous in and of itself to an existential degree, but to cut off all communications is insanity, which is what Biden did, that comatose lunatic. So Trump, to his credit, is at least willing to talk to the Russians, and the Russians, I think quite wisely, have said, we'll continue talking, just if for no other reason, to avoid any, potentially existential escalation in this conflict. But in addition, if you look at polls, and this shouldn't surprise anybody, in the Russian Federation, although President Putin has a very, very high approval rating, far higher than any Western leader. And by the way, I'm relying upon the polls of a polling center called Levada, which is actually critical of President Putin and of his government. So they say, and they have consistently said, and they give the numbers, it's up around 80%. There's a huge approval rating. But at the same time, if you look at the polling data around the war, there's a substantial, proportion of the Russian population that wants the war to come to an end. Now, that doesn't mean that they think the government should throw in the towel or make huge concessions. What it does mean is that they want the government to make efforts, and to maintain a dialogue. And they don't want the war to be resolved on terms that do not ensure Russia's security, but they want there to be genuine efforts on the part of their government to bring the war to an end. And so I think President Putin and Sergei Lavrov and the rest of their team are just doing what the Russian people want them to do, which is to give it an effort, have a genuine discussion, keep the conversation going. And I think also it's not just for the benefit of the Russian people, but there are allies of Russia, particularly the major governments in the BRICS, who want to see this thing ended as well in the reasonably near future. And they would like to see the Russians engage with the U.S. government in a dialogue. And finally, I think at some point, Regis, I don't think we're there yet, and we might not even be close to being there. At some point, Western governments are going to have to bite the bullet and sit down with Russia. It's just, I think it's probably going to happen around the time that the Russian forces get to the Dnieper River. I mean, I think they're not only going to have to take control of all 4 of these oblasts, but they're going to have to show beyond a shadow of a doubt that they're willing to go further than those 4 oblasts. They're already present, Russian forces, in small parts of the Sumy region. They've got a significant chunk of Kharkov, and it's growing. They've got, forces in Dnipro. They're in 3 oblasts, in addition to the 4 that, along with Crimea, that have been incorporated into the Russian Federation. At a certain point, they're going to have so much territory, and they're going to be advancing so rapidly, and the Ukrainian economy is going to be in such a state of collapse that they're just going to have to sit down and give Russia what it's been demanding all along. So I think the Russians are keeping the conversation going because they expect that at some point they will be willing to make the necessary concessions, and they want to be in a position to take advantage of that as quickly as possible when the political conditions finally exist for some kind of a settlement.
Well, we could go on as long as these talks continue that are really allowing the Russian military to keep advancing and rapidly as they are now. I think the Ukrainian line has been penetrated and broken, and several continues much longer. Russia will have to go to Odessa. I don't see how Russia can ever let Odessa fall in the hands of the United States and NATO. But anyway, that's another topic for another day. I want to get back to something you said in your monologue, and you mentioned the names of Glenn Greenwald, Daniel Davis, Mercouris, and Christoforou. You said that they were believing that Trump was sincere about wanting peace. Could you clarify that?
Yeah, the other person I mentioned in my monologue was George Galloway. And by the way, this is not an exhaustive list. There are other people in the what I call the alternative anti-imperialist media, and I include my program in that category. We're an alternative anti-imperialist media outlet. That's the focus of our journalism. They all expressed the view during this period, from the time that the so-called scoop came out on November 18th up until the time I did my monologue, that Donald Trump himself genuinely wants peace with the Russian Federation, a durable peace, and that he is making efforts to do that, but he's being undermined by 3 villains. They characterize them as the villains. The first group of villains are the neocons in Washington. And then the second group of villains are the European leaders. And the third group of villains are the Ukrainians. And so everybody else, and they even, sometimes will acknowledge, these commentators, that another obstacle, although they don't characterize the Russian government as a villain, is that the Russians are making pretty harsh demands of Ukraine, and that too is an obstacle. So all of this, all of these villains and Russia's demands collectively are stopping Donald Trump, the peacemaker, from achieving this key foreign policy priority of his administration. Everybody's to blame but Donald Trump. That's basically their analysis. I mean, and it's just mind-boggling to me that anybody would think that Donald Trump is genuinely interested in peace. And so I don't think that the villains, which is to say the neocons or the European leaders like Starmer and Macron or Merz or Zelensky, are doing anything other than what Donald Trump wants them to do. So, with respect to the neocons, I point out that one of the most bloodthirsty neocons in the entire U.S. political elite is Marco Rubio. Well, if Donald Trump is in such a different place intellectually with respect to this key foreign policy priority, that's what they call it, of ending the Ukraine war, why did he appoint Marco Rubio to be his Secretary of State? Did somebody put a gun to Donald Trump's head and say, you got to appoint this bloodthirsty neocon to be your Secretary of State, and he's going to sabotage your efforts to end the Ukraine war? You know, he put him there because he expected Rubio to do what he wants Rubio to do. And if Rubio wasn't doing what he wanted Rubio to do, Donald Trump would do what he has done over and over again and then brag about it, which is to say he would fire Rubio's ass. Has Donald Trump ever given you the slightest impression that he's hesitant to fire people who aren't doing the job that he wants them to do? So I think the rational interpretation of what is going on here is that whatever Rubio is doing, he's doing it because that's what the president has assigned him to do. And I also pointed out that, you know, when he was running against Rubio for the Republican nomination back in 2016, you know, Donald Trump mocked Rubio. He called him Little Marco, and he made fun of the fact that he has a propensity to sweat and he likes to put on makeup before he goes on camera. You know, he just openly mocked the guy. So, you know, there's no argument you can make that Donald Trump is somehow enthralled to Marco Rubio, that he's got too much respect for Marco Rubio. I mean, he would get rid of Rubio in a heartbeat if he thought that Rubio was undermining a key part of his foreign policy. So with respect to the Europeans, I mean, I just point out that, you know, when Donald Trump came to I could talk about a lot of things here to make my point, but I'll just point out that when Donald Trump returned to the White House in January, he immediately came out and said, you got to raise your military spending to 5% of GDP to all NATO members. And this is economically ruinous, Regis. It's economically ruinous for Western countries. It is an absolutely insane idea that we are going to spend 5% of GDP year after year on our militaries. We can't even afford 2% of GDP. Nobody had ever made such a demand of the NATO countries, only Donald Trump. And what did they do? They stood at attention and they said, yes, sir, without any debate. There was no debate. Here in Canada, our prime minister said yes to 5% of GDP, which is going to bankrupt this country if they actually try to spend that much year after year on the military, without any discussion in Parliament. There were no commissions of inquiry. There were no experts convened to talk about what were going to be the economic impacts of this. It was absolutely mind-boggling that they all immediately, without any meaningful investigation or public discussion, any kind of debate, said yes to an economically ruinous demand from Washington. And that tells you all you need to know about how subservient they are to Donald Trump, all of these leaders. So the idea that they're out there undermining Donald Trump, laughable, utterly laughable. And then we come to Ukraine. No one is more dependent upon the Trump administration's goodwill than Volodymyr Zelensky. The man is completely and utterly beholden to Washington. Without Washington's economic support, the Ukrainian economy would collapse. It's basically on life support right now. And it's only because Washington is backing it a number of ways along with its European vassals that it manages to survive at all. And the Ukrainian military would run out of weaponry in no time if the Americans cut off the flow of weapons. And the Americans have the most sophisticated ISR in the world, with Russia having the second most sophisticated. You know, their constellation of military satellites and so forth. They use them every day to provide to the Ukrainian forces key battlefield intelligence about where Russian military assets are, where their troop formations are. They provide targeting data to the Ukrainian military. The Americans do. If you take all of that away, okay, all of the military command support that they're receiving and so forth, Ukraine is dead in the water. And on top of that, Zelensky is now embroiled in finally a corruption scandal. He has been an illegitimate leader since May of last year when his term expired. He's deeply unpopular, as the polls show. So he is totally and utterly beholden to Washington. And the idea that this man is going to say no to Donald Trump is laughable. It's just straight up laughable. If Donald Trump truly wanted that man to make the concessions that would be necessary to bring an end to the war, he'll make them. And he's not making them because Donald Trump doesn't want him to. It's all a lie.
I don't think we can emphasize that enough. And that's why I began with that I began with it, that it basically is a lie. The United States has been about deception. We've been lied into so many wars. I mean, today, December 7th, 1941, Pearl Harbor, the day that will live in infamy. FDR knew that the Japanese had to attack. He cut off their supply of oil. We basically have been lied forever. And so right now, I think it's more serious than ever because, as you mentioned briefly, we're talking about the two largest nuclear states in the world. And the danger that something could go wrong, a miscalculation, misreading something on radar, or with all of these hostile flights close to Russia's borders, some hotshot pilot makes a bad mistake. We're in the middle of a nuclear Armageddon. Mm-hmm. So it's really very dangerous. And I don't think we can emphasize enough how we've been lied to and being lied to again now. It's just very frightening. Dimitri, I want to move on to the national security strategy that was just issued. I read through it, and what I saw immediately was a number of contradictions in that strategy. But what I immediately thought of is this is just another deception. You have pointed out repeatedly about the United States and Donald Trump continuing to support the genocide in Palestine. As they talk about peace, as they talk about world peace, you can't believe this stuff. And as Donald Trump is threatening Venezuela, Maduro, we're going to have a land invasion. We're going to get rid of you. I'm going to give you safe passage for you and wife to get the hell out of there so we can come in and take over your country, take over your oil. All lies, all deception. And Dimitri, I don't know how you feel about this national security strategy, but I see it as just another smokescreen, another distraction, another attempt to get everybody to just, okay, let's just calm down. Let's not pay attention to what's really going on. What are your thoughts?
So let's, I'll start from, I guess, first principles. When you're dealing with a politician who is a demonstrated pathological liar, you don't listen to what he says, you watch what he does. That just seems to me to be basic common sense. You don't have to be a sophisticated geopolitical analyst to understand this. In the real world, all of us do this. If we're dealing with someone who has a demonstrated record of lying, we put them to the test and demand that their actions match their rhetoric. And if their actions are contrary to the rhetoric, we infer that they're lying again, just as they have done over and over again. Does anybody actually think that Donald Trump is an honest man? Is this the record of Donald Trump? There is no president in the history of the United States, as far as I can tell, who has lied as often and as audaciously as Donald Trump has in his political career. I mean, we are talking about epic levels of lying. If that man deserves a Nobel Prize, it's for lying. He's the champion. And so with such a record, we should just completely park any consideration of his rhetoric, look at his actions. Now, you mentioned some of the things that he's done since he came to office. Let's just be a little more expansive about his record since he returned to the White House. And I'm not even going to go on and on about his first administration, which in and of itself was an exercise in incessant warmongering. In addition to killing people, murdering people in the Caribbean, there's just straight up murder. That's all it is. Even if these people are drug traffickers, under U.S. law, not just international law, under U.S. law, it would be a crime to just shoot them dead, when they're not actually, pointing a gun at somebody or engaged in acts of violence. They're just transporting drugs across the water. That's the allegation. There's no evidence to back it up. It would be a crime to shoot them dead. You're supposed to arrest them under U.S. law and charge them formally with an indictment so they know what the charges are against them, and then they have an opportunity to hire a lawyer and to defend themselves in open court in accordance with due process. That's what U.S. law requires. And even under U.S. law, if they're convicted after all of that, U.S. law does not impose the death penalty for drug trafficking. It does impose the death penalty in certain cases, but not for drug smuggling. So all of this is just running roughshod over U.S. domestic law, let alone international law. And in addition, he's not only threatening to invade Venezuela and murdering these people, he's actually threatened to take military action against Colombia and Mexico. Mexico, I think the largest or second largest trading partner of the United States. He has, threatened to confiscate Greenland. These are all things, by the way, that even Biden didn't do. Okay, no U.S. president did all these things. He has bombed Iran's nuclear facilities. Not only did he do something that, just bombing Iran by itself was a new act of aggression that no prior U.S. president had done. But in addition, he bombed nuclear facilities, which have special protected status for obvious reasons under international law. That is extremely dangerous. And he armed Israel to the teeth and enabled Israel to mass murder Iranian civilians, attacking even a broadcasting center, taking out civilian nuclear scientists and so forth. He has enabled Israel to flatten South Lebanon. I've been there 5 times since this genocide began. They've literally flattened South Lebanon, and they won't allow the Lebanese people to return to their homes and rebuild Lebanon. That all happened under Trump's watch, and it's going on every day. Every single day, Israel is bombing Lebanon with Trump's approval and support in violation of a ceasefire agreement that was entered into in late 2024. And in respect of which the United States is supposed to be a mediator, a guarantor. The United States is supposed to rein in Israel and make sure that it complies with that agreement. Instead, it's done exactly the opposite and authorize and enable Israel to bomb Lebanon every single day since that ceasefire came into effect. The Trump administration is waging a tariff war all over the world, destabilizing the global economy. The Trump administration is now effectively using Japan as its, the Asian version of the Ukrainian proxy to saber rattle against, China. The Japanese, this is insanity. The Japanese came out and were basically saying that if the Chinese government tries to retake Taiwan by force, even though the international community recognizes that Taiwan is part of China, that they would regard that as a threat to Japan, implying that Japan would go to war with China if the Chinese finally got fed up and said, we're not going to tolerate anymore the U.S. sending weapons to Taiwan, which is what the Trump administration is doing. It's arming Taiwan, which is part of the sovereign territory of China. There's nothing about this man's behavior. And I already talked about what he's doing in Ukraine, continuing to provide weaponry, although the Europeans are paying for it now, military intelligence and so forth. There's nothing, zero, in this man's behavior since he returned to the White House, which supports the rhetoric of peace that he has been spewing from the moment he threw his hat into the ring to run for the Republican nomination in the run-up to the 2024 election. So why would anybody, given his demonstrated propensity to lie, take him seriously when every single thing that he is doing stinks of war, more war? This just boggles my mind, Regis. I talked a little bit about this phenomenon in my monologue known as Trump derangement syndrome. And the first, many of your audience members may have heard this phrase before. The first time I heard it used was back in the first Trump administration when people were mocking people like Glenn Greenwald, Aaron Mate, with complete justification, were mocking the idea that Donald Trump had been put in the White House in 2016 by Russia, and that Russia had hacked the election, and that Donald Trump was a puppet of Vladimir Putin. And the Russian government had compromat on Donald Trump and so forth. By the way, if anybody has compromat on Donald Trump, it's Israel, because by all indications, Jeffrey Epstein was an Israeli asset, and Donald Trump was a good friend of Jeffrey Epstein. So who knows what compromat Israel has on Donald Trump, but Russia, there's no evidence that Russia has compromat on Donald Trump. All this was just a fantasy that was concocted by the Democrats in order to justify Hillary Clinton's loss to this carnival barker, which was deeply embarrassing to the Democrats, and B, to undermine Trump's first administration. And it became mired in this hoax, the Russiagate hoax, virtually the entire first administration. And so, they coined this phrase, Trump derangement syndrome, to describe those who bought into this hoax. Well, I think we can all say with confidence that Trump derangement syndrome is a two-sided coin. There are those who, like the Democrats back in the first administration, believed whatever was being said about Donald Trump, no matter how ridiculous it was or how unsubstantiated it was. But there are also those, sadly, who cling to the belief that Donald Trump is a peacemaker when all the evidence is to the contrary. That too is a form of Trump derangement syndrome. I don't know how these people, the people I've mentioned, they are sophisticated geopolitical commentators most of the time, and they've done a lot of good work in their lives. And I don't want to sound disrespectful, because on the whole, I think they make a very valuable contribution to the public discourse. But for some insane reason, they continue to believe Trump's rhetoric about wanting to end the Ukraine war, even though everything that man is actually doing on the ground is warmongering all over the world. He's like a bull in a china shop, wreaking havoc in every corner of the planet. I don't get it, Regis. It's a mystery to me how anybody could take that man's claim to want to end the Ukraine war seriously.
A couple of things. You mentioned a number of these people in the alt media, very famous, huge followers, were seemingly wanting to give Donald Trump the benefit of the doubt. I agree with you. I think, as you have said, you respect them. Most of their work has been very good.
Yep.
But where they fail and where they fall into the Trump derangement syndrome, it has to be pointed out. I commend you for doing that. I try to do that myself. The second thing, there's no longer a anti-war peace movement in the United States or anywhere in the world. They're all operating in silos. They don't talk to each other. They don't work with each other. And this is a huge problem. So when it comes to, on the one hand, criticizing some of our colleagues who are basically really good guys trying to do their best, we have to all get under the same tent. We have to somehow remain united in fighting against the lies, fighting against Donald Trump right now, who is obviously not in favor of peace.
Yeah.
Dimitri, I want to ask you one last question before we finish.
Can I just add one thing, just about what you said? I want to clarify, like, I wouldn't even mention their names if I wouldn't talk about them at all if they didn't have large audiences. They do have large audiences. These men, and understandably so, with good reason, they influence millions of people. And it's really important. This is not a purely academic question, what Donald Trump is actually trying to do. It is a question of the utmost practical significance. And if you persuade Americans that Donald Trump is actually trying to end the Ukraine war, when in fact he's not, then they're more likely to support Donald Trump and the Republicans in the next election, for example, the midterms, or at least they're less likely to oppose him. So we have an obligation as journalists to, keep our audience members informed about issues as momentous as war and peace. And this is the only reason why I mention them by name and criticize them, because I want people to know that they should really scrutinize very carefully the claim that is being made, not only by them, but others in the alt media, that Trump is genuinely interested in ending the Ukraine war.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. Now, I wonder what your thoughts are, and if you have any information about Trump's following in the United States. I have a couple of friends who, and family, who have been MAGA supporters. But two things have happened. Number one, that little Jeffrey Epstein thing that just won't go away has caused some of my friends and family to now begin questioning Donald Trump, begin moving away from Donald Trump. And what they're saying is, well, you know, there's a couple of things that I like that he's doing, and so I support him. One is this whole thing on immigration. They like that. They like the idea that he wants to make America great again and bring back industry to America and make America more competitive. But I wonder what the polling must be like in America now in terms of Donald Trump's popularity. You mentioned Putin's popularity is in the 80th percentile. It's been there for the last several years. Where do you think Trump is at?
That's a good question. And last time I checked, it was at a very low rating. So here I just quickly did an update search. And according to the New York Times, his approval rating is now at 42%. It is at its lowest point, or almost at its lowest point, since he returned to the White House. Back at the beginning of March, it was up around 52%, and 55% disapprove. So in addition to the polling numbers, and by the way, that's significantly better than Starmer and Macron and Mertz, and it's a miracle, frankly, that it's that high, in my opinion. But quite apart from the numbers, which are grim for Donald Trump, the discourse on in the MAGA movement is it blows my mind, the things that are being said right now. I've watched a number of Candace Owens episodes recently, not because she and I are aligned politically on many things we're not, but she has been devoting one program after another to condemning U.S. support for Israel. And she's now become, I think, if not the largest podcast, one of the largest in the world. She has a huge audience, and this is a subject to which she returns constantly in her discussions. And not just that, she's demanding, as have many people in the MAGA movement, the release of the Epstein files. So in addition to Candace Owens, very influential figure from the MAGA movement, I don't even know if she would continue to call herself MAGA at this stage. She might actually be uncomfortable with that description. But then you have Tucker Carlson, who has been openly critical of U.S. support for Israel, increasingly so, continuing to have a very, very influential role in the MAGA movement. You comedian Dave Smith. This is just naming three people who are beloved in the MAGA movement. There are others that are emerging. And so I watch Candace Owens just because I find it absolutely remarkable that somebody who's such a well-known and well-liked conservative figure in the United States is routinely criticizing in the harshest possible terms U.S. support for Israel and people who support Israel. So this is a big change in American politics right now. And if Donald Trump, continues going down the path that he's going down, there will be no MAGA movement, or the MAGA movement is going to turn against him en masse. It already has begun to turn against him. And I think, frankly, Regis, this is exactly why Donald Trump constantly talks about peace, because he knows that the MAGA movement wants him to bring these wars to an end, to stop generating new wars. And so he's trying to pull the wool over their eyes, and it's just not working, as far as I can tell. I think he's particularly concerned about what's going to happen in the midterms, because if he loses control of the Senate and the House, which is entirely possible given the way things are going in the United States, I think there's a high prospect of him being impeached. And there's plenty of ground to impeach him. Like just what he's doing in the Caribbean, murdering people in violation not only of international law, but U.S. domestic law. The way he sent these ICE agents into the street. I personally am not a fan of his approach to immigration. I think that these goons who are running around the streets of America terrorizing people, many of whom are not illegal immigrants, is a disgrace. He could be impeached for that. He could be impeached because of the revelations from the Epstein files. They have until December 19th under the Epstein Files Transparency Act to release the Epstein files. That could be a bombshell for the Republicans. So he's in real trouble. And I think he's desperately flailing about trying to persuade people of his bona fides when it comes to peace, because he has a deep-seated concern about being impeached.
You mentioned Candace Owens and Tucker Carlson. I haven't been a big fan of Tucker, but I did subscribe to his network. I don't agree with him on a lot of things. I don't like the fact now that he's commercializing and he's got a Black Friday sale for all the merchandise he's trying to sell. I don't like any of that. But, I have to admit, the guy has changed his position on Vladimir Putin. He came to Russia. He interviewed him. He's begun to change his tune on the Ukraine war. And I think he's a very, very powerful voice amongst the MAGA people. He's turned against Trump on Israel big time, which I was really surprised at. Mm-hmm. And I think he's moving towards wanting to show Russia as having legitimate concerns about their security. And so from where I'm sitting, I think that I agree with you that I think Trump is in trouble with his MAGA people. My own friends seem to be turning against him. They're clinging to a couple of his promises, against this immigration. They're in favor of ICE. And, they want to see America be reindustrialized again and have jobs. All those young people that are coming out of college for decades now can't find jobs. They're serving as baristas and they're selling phones and kiosks in the shopping malls. He hasn't come through with anything he promised for these people. Anyway, Dimitri, I want to thank you so much. It's always great to be with you, and I love your show, Reason to Resist. I'm putting it across the bottom of the screen right now. I want to encourage everybody to subscribe to Dimitri's Substack channel. He's got something like 112,000 subscribers now. It's just exploded in the last year. And you won't find a better, more brighter analyst than my friend Dimitri Lascaris. Dimitri, thank you so much.
Thank you for the very kind words, Regis, and keep up the great work. I'm glad to have, by the way, helped you to connect to John Helmer. And if you want to ever have a discussion, the three of us together, I'd be happy to do that.